Have you ever looked in the mirror and had the strange feeling that you're living a life that doesn't feel like yours? Ever smiled on the outside while something inside you was screaming? Most people think that finding themselves is an external journey, a new career, a new country, a new relationship. But what if I told you that the real reunion happens when you stop abandoning yourself? That's the idea behind Carl Jung's work. And maybe that's exactly why no one ever taught you about individuation, because it doesn't turn you into a product to be sold. It sets you free. And free people make others uncomfortable. Individuation isn't just a pretty theory from some old book. It's a living, visceral, almost revolutionary practice. It's the moment you realize that constant anxiety might be the symptom of a self that never had permission to exist. It's when you understand that emptiness isn't the absence of something external, but the absence of yourself. And this awakening doesn't come with ready-made formulas. It happens in silence, in the shadows, in the breakups, and in the choices no one claps for. It's not a path for gurus, it's for spiritual warriors. And yes, it begins the moment you get tired of pretending. The inner calling. When the soul asks for silence. There comes a moment in life when everything feels too loud. The opinions of others, the expectations of family, the endless social media feed. Everything screams at once. But there's another sound, far more subtle, that few ever hear. The call of the soul. And it doesn't come with a megaphone. It whispers. It whispers in the quiet moments when you're alone and feel a discomfort you can't explain. A hollowness between one appointment and the next. A deep sigh between one victory and another. This calling isn't about religion or dogma. It's about spirituality in its purest form, an invitation to turn inward. Carl Jung said that silence is where the unconscious begins to speak. And in that silence, the ego starts to unravel, because the ego survives on noise. The soul, on the other hand, blooms when the mind grows still. And that's where the real journey begins. Curiously, people get used to living in noise. Always rushing, always connected, always in a hurry. But where to exactly? When was the last time you sat in complete silence? No music, no screen, no voices. Most people run from that moment because deep down, they know they'll come face to face with something they've avoided, their own shadow. Jung called this shadow work. The difficult task of confronting the rejected parts of ourselves. Silence is scary because truth lives there, and truth demands change. That's why distraction feels safer. But the more we run, the more the body breaks down, the more the mind drifts, the louder the soul cries. The calling doesn't go away, it just changes shape. And sometimes it turns into pain. You don't need elaborate rituals to start hearing this call. What you need are small, consistent actions. It could be a silent 15-minute walk each day, no headphones, just noticing what you feel. It could be journaling, unfiltered, everything that's running through your mind before bed. It could be reading something that challenges your current way of thinking. Books like Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung or The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. What matters is creating space for the unconscious to speak, because it will. And the more you listen, the more you realize your soul doesn't want fame or money or approval. It wants to be heard. And when it finally is, something starts to shift. But that shift won't always feel good, especially when what it reveals is exactly what you've been trying to avoid. The shadow you reject is the key to your healing. Everyone wants to be light, to be accepted, admired, validated. But what no one told you, or maybe you chose not to hear, is that your real strength lives exactly where you've been taught to hide. In the shadow, that part of you that feels jealousy, anger, fear, neediness. Carl Jung said the shadow isn't evil by nature, it simply is. The problem is, when you repress it, you give it unconscious power, and whatever remains unconscious ends up running your life without your awareness. The rejected shadow doesn't disappear. It disguises itself as self-sabotage, procrastination, or the same old destructive patterns you can't explain. And the more you pretend it's not there, the better it gets at manipulating you from within. Think about that person who always pushes your buttons, or that situation that keeps repeating itself until it feels like a bad joke. Guess what? That's your shadow trying to be seen. Someone who keeps dating emotionally unavailable partners, for example, may be carrying an old abandonment wound that's never been acknowledged. And the shadow keeps showing up, attracting the same pain until it's finally healed. Doing shadow work isn't about blaming yourself for your flaws. It's about finally facing them. It's about recognizing that your ego built a persona to survive, but that persona can't hold your soul. True spirituality isn't about looking enlightened. It's about facing your darkness without losing your tenderness. You don't need to go on expensive retreats or move to another country to begin this process of integration. It starts at home with one honest question in front of the mirror. What part of me do I hide most from others? You can write the answer down in a journal, or start paying attention to your emotional triggers, especially the ones that spark overreactions. Guided meditations on shadow work, like those by Matteo Sol or Inner Integration, can also help open that listening space. It's an intimate investigation, but a powerful one. Because at the core, the shadow just wants to be acknowledged. And when it is, it transforms. What once was pain becomes power. What once felt like weakness turns into strength. And what once looked like chaos begins to form a map. That's where you start to see the first signs of a deeper kind of love. Self-love as spiritual activism. In a world that profits from your insecurity, loving yourself is a rebellious act. Not the superficial kind of self-love we see on social media, all pretty quotes and perfectly filtered selfies. But the kind that shows up when you choose to honor yourself even on the days no one understands you. Carl Jung said, "What we deny in ourselves enslaves us, and real self-love is about breaking those chains." True self-love requires shadow work, because it's not about inflating the ego, but about embracing what the ego tries to hide. And let's be honest, that's scary, because real self-love means looking inward and saying, even with all my wounds, I am worthy of being here. That's not vanity. That's raw spirituality. This kind of love changes everything. It changes how you work, because you stop burning yourself out to prove your worth. It changes how you relate, because you stop settling for emotional crumbs. It even changes how you talk to your body, because you start listening instead of fighting it. A practical example? Start paying attention to your small daily choices. Are you eating to nourish yourself or to numb yourself? Are you saying yes out of desire or out of fear of rejection? These are simple questions, but they reveal how much of your life is driven by love or by self-abandonment. And when you start choosing yourself, even when it disappoints others, something magical happens. Your soul smiles, because it realizes that finally, someone is taking care of her. There is no real self-love without courage. Because loving yourself also means disappointing the expectations of those who got used to the version of you shaped by pain. It means saying no where you once stayed silent. It means setting boundaries, even while shaking. And yes, some people will call you selfish, but there's a big difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness hurts others to satisfy itself. Self-respect heals itself, so it no longer depends on other people's wounds. And that kind of love, born from honoring yourself, doesn't need to justify itself, it just is. And it's in that sacred soil that individuation begins to take root. Because true spiritual activism isn't about changing the world out there. It's about refusing to keep wounding yourself for the sake of fitting in. And in this new inner landscape, the invisible starts to feel heavy. The invisible weight you're carrying without knowing. There's something in you that feels exhausted, but you can't explain why. It's not just physical, it runs deeper. It's like you're dragging an invisible suitcase around every day. And the worst part? You don't even know what's inside. Carl Jung said we carry not just our personal stories, but also the unconscious baggage of our family, our culture, and collective traumas. And what isn't brought into consciousness repeats as fate. In other words, you might be spending your whole life trying to fix a pain that was never yours to begin with. An emotionally distant mother, an absent father, a grandfather who was never allowed to cry. All of that turns into weight on your shoulders, even if you're smiling in the photos. The persona learns to fake lightness, but the body always reveals what the soul can no longer carry. Have you ever felt an unexplained guilt when saying no, or constant anxiety without a clear reason? Those are signs of a weight that isn't yours, but that you've sworn to carry as if it were. That's the modern-day martyr archetype, the one who believes they must be strong all the time, take care of everyone, save the world, and forget themselves. But here's the truth. Emotional weight that isn't recognized turns into illness, burnout, and stagnation. That's why individuation also means letting go. And that's not abandonment, that's maturity. A simple practice: grab a pen and paper and write down, what am I carrying that isn't mine? Go deep. Sometimes just naming what's heavy already brings relief. The invisible responds to your courage to see it, and when you begin to let go of that weight, space opens up. At first, that space may feel strange. You'll want to fill it with more tasks, more relationships, more goals, because you were taught that being full equals being valuable. But the soul doesn't want excess. It wants truth. And that truth isn't always comfortable, but it is liberating. When you release what's not yours, you start hearing what's always been. Intuition returns, the body breathes, and a new sensation, almost forgotten, begins to rise. Lightness, not the forced kind, the kind you fake when you pretend to be fine, but the real kind, the lightness of being at peace with what stayed and with what you chose to let go. And in that silence after the relief, the universe starts to respond. Synchronicity, when the universe responds to your truth. Sometimes everything just clicks. You think of someone and they call. You walk away from one path and a new opportunity appears right on time. Coincidence? Carl Jung called this synchronicity. Events that don't have an obvious cause but carry deep meaning. It's as if the universe is whispering, keep going, you're on the right path. But here's the thing, synchronicity doesn't happen to people living on autopilot. It shows up when the soul is awake, when the ego gets quiet enough for spirituality to speak. And most often, it comes after a period of pain, silence, or surrender. It's the answer to your truth, not to your effort. Which is why the more you try to control, the more disconnected you become. So many people wait for a sign from the universe, but ignore the signs within. And that's the mistake. Outer synchronicity is just a reflection of inner alignment. When your actions, emotions, and thoughts align with what's true for you, not what others expect, the world starts to respond differently. Here's a real-life example. A woman finally walks away from a toxic relationship, unsure of what's next. Days later, she's offered a job in a different state, something she never would have considered before. That's the archetype of the crossing. When you take a step into the dark, something lights up. But that only happens when you have the courage to break away from the persona you built to please others. Because the universe doesn't respond to masks, it responds to essence. Paying attention to synchronicity is an exercise in presence. It's noticing recurring dreams, symbols that keep showing up, phrases that repeat themselves. It's starting to look at life as if you're listening to a poem, not reading a manual. A simple tip? Keep a symbolic journal. Write down strange events, unexpected encounters, curious repetitions. After a few weeks, you'll start to see patterns. And when you do, don't overthink them. Feel them. The soul speaks in symbols, and synchronicity is its secret grammar. It doesn't prove anything, but it confirms everything. And just when you start trusting that flow, old voices try to pull you back. Voices that say it's all nonsense, that you're being naive. But what if you're not? The inner critic isn't you. It's an echo from the past. You know that voice that says you're not good enough. The one that shows up right when you're about to try something new, love someone, or simply rest. That voice isn't you. It sounds like you do, same tone, same logic, but it's an imposter. Carl Jung taught that much of what we call self is actually a collage of inherited voices, demanding parents, harsh teachers, unresolved traumas. The inner critic is a past echo, disguised as your conscience. And the most twisted part, it hides behind the mask of protection. It says it wants to keep you safe, but what it really does is keep your soul small, your ego fed, and your individuation stuck. That critic starts young. Sometimes with small but devastating lines, "You're not smart enough. You always mess things up. Stop dreaming so big." Over time, you start repeating them without noticing. And one day, they become your identity. A persona built from the fear of failing, the fear of not being loved, the fear of not being enough. But here's the truth. What you're most afraid of being is probably what you were taught to repress. Shadow work here means recognizing that voice, naming it, and giving it back to where it came from. A powerful exercise: write a letter to your inner critic. Respond to every line it throws at you. Read it out loud. It might feel awkward at first, but you'll be surprised how quickly that voice loses power when exposed to light. And that's where the shift begins. When the inner critic loses its grip, something unexpected happens. A space opens for real listening. Intuition grows louder. Ideas flow more freely. The body relaxes, but be careful, the critic is clever. It can return wearing a new mask, the mask of spiritual perfectionism, the enlightened role model, and that too is just ego in disguise. Because individuation isn't about perfection, it's about wholeness. And being whole means embracing flaws, limits and shadows. The critic wants you to perform a safe life. The soul wants you to live a true one. And when that truth starts to rise, your old internal compass might feel broken, but is it? Or did you simply forget how to use it? Intuition, the soul's forgotten compass. Intuition is that feeling that shows up before logic, and that we're so quick to ignore. It's the voice that whispers, "Don't go there," even when everything looks good on paper. Carl Jung saw intuition as one of the most powerful and most neglected psychic functions. But in a world that worships reason as the ultimate truth, trusting your intuition feels like madness. Yet the real madness is living cut off from it. Intuition is the soul's compass. While the ego clings to torn-up maps trying to predict everything, the soul just points. No guarantees, no demands, just direction. And here's the twist. The more you try to control, the more lost you get. Most people ignore their intuition because it doesn't come with proof. No charts, no data, no explanations. Just a feeling. And feeling, especially when you've been taught to suppress your emotions, feels risky. A real-life example? That job that looks great on your resume, but tightens your chest just thinking about it. Or that friendship everyone praises, but something deep inside urges you to step away. Ignoring that is ignoring yourself. Here's a simple practice to reconnect. Before making any decision, close your eyes and check in with your body. Where does it tighten? Where does it release? The soul speaks through the body, and intuition lives in the body, not the mind. We just have to relearn how to listen with the heart. Trusting your intuition is an act of faith in yourself, and it takes practice. Start small. Take the route that calls you home, even if it makes no sense. Say no when something doesn't feel right, even if everyone else says yes. Keep a journal of the times you followed your gut, and it worked. Over time, you'll realize intuition isn't some mystical gift. It's your birthright, one that's been numbed by overthinking. And as you begin to listen, the world around you shifts. You make fewer mistakes. You get hurt less. You attract what truly resonates. And in that new kind of listening, a deeper question starts to rise. One that echoes from the inside out with almost ancestral power. What if living with soul is the real purpose of life? Individuation as a spiritual mission and an act of courage. To individuate, in Carl Jung's words, is to become who you truly are, beyond the masks, beyond the ego, beyond the persona built to survive. But no one told you this path would be lonely. Because when you start to stand apart from the collective, you make people uncomfortable. Family, friends, even yourself. Individuation is a spiritual mission, not just a search for yourself, but a remembering the soul you were before you learned to hide. And this process isn't linear. There's no finish line where everything suddenly makes sense. It's a spiral journey, full of setbacks, rebirths, losses, and awakenings, and above all, it takes courage. Because looking at yourself honestly is a radical act in a world built to make you conform. Individuation doesn't mean quitting everything and moving to a cave. It begins in the details, in saying, "This no longer represents me," and accepting the consequences. In questioning habits, beliefs, and even goals that once seemed unquestionable. It's breaking free from the trance of everyone does it and asking, but do I really want this? It's realizing that the ego wants stability, but the soul wants expansion. That the persona seeks approval, but the self longs for expression. And then the inner conflict begins, because society rewards performance, not authenticity. But within that discomfort, that subtle ache growing in your chest, lies the beginning of your freedom. And yes, it will come with losses, but also with reunions, with parts of you thought had died. Individuation is a path without guarantees. There's no trophy at the end, no stage, no applause. But it gives you something no fake life ever could. Peace. Not the fake kind, the always Zen kind. But the peace of living in alignment with what you feel, think, and do. The peace of changing direction without having to explain. Of listening to your intuition and following it, even without a map. Of facing your shadow without shame. Of realizing that spirituality isn't about appearing evolved, but about becoming whole. And when you start living this way, something in you settles, and something else lights up. And it's right there, in that quiet turning point, that the journey begins again. Now that you've come this far, answer honestly, how many parts of you are still locked away in the dark rooms of your soul, waiting for your permission to exist? How many versions of yourself have you silenced just to meet someone else's expectations? Individuation isn't the end, it's a beginning. The breaking point where you decide once and for all that living on autopilot isn't enough. So the question is, will you keep ignoring the soul's whispers, or will you finally start listening? Everything you've learned here today is just the surface of a much deeper journey. And if something inside you stirred, even if you can't quite name it, don't ignore it. Come back. This channel is your refuge, your safe space, your spiritual home. Every week, we dive into topics most people avoid, but your soul craves. You know that feeling of waiting for the next episode of your favorite show? That's how I want you to feel here, because this isn't just a video, it's a crossing, and every new video is another key to unlock the doors inside you that lead you home. So if something here touched you, don't let that spark die with the next click. Subscribe now, hit the bell, commit to yourself, not for me, not to look spiritual, but because there's a part of you that's tired of being asleep. And together, video by video, chapter by chapter, we'll light that fire until one day you won't need a map anymore because you'll have become the path itself.